Don't watch alone.
It was one of those nights where the air felt too thick, where every shadow seemed heavier than the last, and the wind whispered secrets that didn't belong to anyone alive. I shouldn't have been alone, but something inside me, a mix of defiance and morbid curiosity, pushed me to stay. My apartment had always been quiet, too quiet, but that night the silence felt alive, like it was breathing just beyond my skin. The clock on the wall ticked in uneven rhythms, a soft reminder that time still existed outside the grip of the darkness pressing against my windows. The city was asleep, or at least it appeared that way, but I knew better. I could feel the pulse of the streets through the floorboards, the faint hum of cars that sounded almost like distant warnings, and then there were the noises that didn't belong to anything human, the scratch of fingernails along concrete, the soft shuffle of feet where no one should be walking. I had been scrolling through forums, the kind people claim are cursed or haunted, reading stories people swore were true. I knew it was stupid, but the more I read, the more I felt drawn to something I couldn't name. They called it the Shadow Watcher, a presence that only revealed itself when you were alone, when the night was so deep it swallowed your reflection. The stories warned that if you saw it, it would follow you forever, sitting at the edge of your vision, just beyond the threshold of reality. And yet, I didn't believe any of it. Until the lights flickered. It started with the faintest twitch of the lamp in the corner. 1 second it burned with warm yellow light, the next it was a smear of darkness, and then back again, as if it were breathing with the same rhythm as my own pulse. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was just the wiring, the cheap fixtures in my old building. But then I noticed something else, subtle at first, a movement in the reflection of my window that didn't match anything outside. A shadow stretching longer than it should, a figure that had no right to exist, and it seemed to be staring at me. My skin crawled. I felt a cold sweat gather along the back of my neck as I turned slowly, expecting nothing and fearing everything. The room was empty. Yet when I glanced back at the window, it was there again, only for a second, barely a form, but unmistakably watching. I tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, my overactive imagination, maybe even a trick of the streetlight reflecting off the buildings across the way. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that nothing could hurt me, that it was just a shadow. Shadows couldn't move. Shadows couldn't follow you when you closed your eyes. Shadows couldn't whisper. And yet, I could hear it. A sound so soft it might have been the wind, or the pipes settling, or a distant animal. But the sound carried a weight, a cadence that felt deliberate, like breathing that wasn't mine. I froze in place, every nerve screaming, as a voice, thin and raspy, whispered my name from the corner of the room. Not loud enough to form words fully, just a breath, a syllable, and then silence. My heart slammed against my ribs. I told myself to leave, to step into the hallway, turn on the lights in the stairwell, anything. But something held me there, glued to the spot, compelled by curiosity I would later regret. The shadows began to shift more aggressively, stretching unnaturally across the walls, crawling up the corners as if they had teeth. And then my reflection moved on its own. I saw it in the mirror, standing behind me, a twisted mimic of my own posture, darker than darkness itself, a void with the faint glint of something like eyes. I turned slowly, dread curling around my chest like steel bands, and the reflection smiled. A smile that was not mine, jagged and hungry, stretching wider than any human mouth could, filled with shadows instead of teeth. Panic finally broke me. I grabbed my phone, the screen casting a weak, tremulous glow, and fumbled to dial my friend's number. But when I looked at the contact, the screen read, "No signal." The room seemed to shrink around me. Every object, the chair, the desk, the bookshelves, appeared warped, bending toward me with intent. Then came the scratching, louder this time, from the hallway outside my apartment door. Something was moving out there, something patient, waiting. I wanted to call for help, wanted to scream, but my voice refused to work, trapped behind a wall of thick, suffocating fear. I thought about running, bolting for the stairs, but the door wasn't just closed, it was gone, replaced by an endless blackness that pulsed as if it were breathing. And then I heard it, clear and unmistakable this time, a voice echoing from every corner of the room at once, whispering things I couldn't fully understand, syllables I didn't know, but that sank into my mind like claws. I felt my knees weaken. My vision blurred. I could sense it all around me, the darkness stretching into the walls, beneath the floorboards, filling the air with an oppressive heat that smelled faintly of iron and decay. I forced myself to look up, and for a brief instant, the lights returned to normal. The window reflected only me, pale and trembling, nothing else. Relief washed over me so violently I almost collapsed. Almost. Then the reflection blinked, and the shadow wasn't behind me anymore. It was inside me. A cold surge ripped through my chest as if the air itself had become liquid, flowing into my lungs, into my veins. I could feel it creeping, crawling along my spine, whispering promises I didn't want to hear. It had a shape now, humanoid but wrong, like a puppet strung with sinew and malice, stretching impossibly tall toward the ceiling. And it was smiling. I ran then, not thinking, not rationalizing, throwing myself against walls, trying doors, anything that would break the impossible grip of that darkness. The apartment twisted around me, corridors stretching impossibly long, shadows forming into walls where none should be. Every step I took seemed to echo into infinity, and every shadow along the walls mimicked my movement with a delay, a grotesque game of follow the leader where the leader wanted only one thing: to consume me. I tripped over nothing and fell hard, scraping my knees and palms on the floor, and when I looked up, the figure was closer. It didn't move like a human, it glided, slipping across surfaces like smoke, its presence pressing against my skull. And then I realized it was laughing. Not a human laugh, not a sound I had ever heard in life, but a low, guttural rumble that made the tiles beneath me shiver. My skin crawled, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I scrambled to my feet, knowing I had no real escape. And then it spoke, not whispering this time, but in a voice that seemed to come from inside my head, from my very bones, telling me, "You invited me. You watched. You cannot leave." I screamed. I don't know how long I screamed. Time had become a smear of sound and darkness, of laughter and shadows twisting into impossible shapes. Every surface I touched felt wrong, sticky, moving, breathing. My apartment had become a living thing, feeding on fear, and it had found me delicious. And then, silence. The kind of silence that carries weight, thick and suffocating. I thought maybe I had passed out, or maybe the world had ended. But when I dared to open my eyes, the window reflected not my face, but a figure standing behind me. Human enough to recognize, but wrong. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, veins black as ink snaking beneath the surface. Its eyes were empty sockets, but I could feel them boring into me, hungry and accusatory. I tried to back away, stumbled over furniture that had grown legs and reached for me, and then it spoke again, softer this time: "You cannot watch alone. Night does not forgive. Night does not forget." And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the apartment returned to normal. The lights were steady, the hallway was visible, and the silence returned. But I knew it had only paused, that it had marked me, that my reflection was no longer mine alone. The air felt heavier, colder. I could feel its presence behind every surface, in every shadow, lingering just beyond the reach of the light. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat. I didn't move from the corner where I had collapsed. All I did was stare at my reflection, terrified to blink, terrified that when I did, it would smile back at me again. And I swear, when I looked in the mirror the next morning, I wasn't the only one in the apartment. The next day felt unreal, like walking through a dream someone else had written. I didn't leave the apartment, didn't answer calls or messages, didn't even check the news. The world outside could wait, because I was trapped in a reality that had grown teeth overnight. Every time I glanced at my reflection, it stared back, but it wasn't me. It was the same pale figure, lingering just behind my eyes, always smiling, always watching. I couldn't tell where it ended and I began. My body felt heavy, weighed down by something invisible pressing against my chest, making every breath a conscious effort, each inhale a battle. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia, that I was imagining it, but even in daylight, even with the windows wide open, I felt its presence in the corners of the room. It had grown, not physically perhaps, but in the sense that it had extended its reach, wrapping its claws around the edges of my mind, infecting the silence with its appetite. I thought of leaving, moving far away, burning the apartment down if necessary, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Stories I had read online hinted at this, that once you saw it, once you invited it with curiosity, there was no escape. You could run, hide, even try to kill yourself, and it would still follow. The thought made bile rise in my throat again. I forced myself to eat something, a granola bar that tasted like sawdust, but it was sustenance. I needed strength, because I knew it was only a matter of time before it came for me again. And then, as if on cue, the lights flickered. A soft hum began to fill the room, vibrating beneath my skin, and I knew it had returned. It started slowly. The objects in my apartment shifted imperceptibly, just enough that I felt them move. The chair I had sat on the day before was closer to the wall, the bookshelves leaning slightly, just barely off balance. Then came the whispers, soft, unintelligible, curling through the air like smoke. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the intent: hunger, amusement, and warning all rolled into one. My reflection blinked independently from me. Its smile widened. I felt heat rush to my face, not from embarrassment, but from sheer, unexplainable fear. I wanted to turn away, but my body wouldn't obey. I was a puppet, bound by invisible strings, forced to watch the horror unfold in the only place I thought I was safe. The apartment grew colder then, a creeping frost that spread across the walls, the floor, my skin. Frost that didn't touch the windows, didn't touch the lights, just me, encasing me in a prison of icy dread. And then I saw it. A shadow on the ceiling, stretching impossibly long, crawling along the corners, feeding off the fear that radiated from me like heat from a furnace. It didn't descend at first. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to make my stomach clench, my limbs heavy, my mind fraying at the edges. It spoke, voice now clear, carrying a cadence that seemed both inside and outside my skull. You invited me. You cannot hide. You cannot leave. I could feel the words crawling under my skin, burrowing into my bones. I tried to run. I tried to break free, smashing my hands against the walls, tearing at the door handle, but the apartment had changed. It had become a maze, corridors lengthened impossibly, hallways twisting into one another like some kind of cruel Escher painting. Shadows multiplied, forming humanoid shapes that lingered just out of reach. I could feel them watching, waiting, and I knew if I made a mistake, one glance too long, one wrong movement, they would reach for me and I would vanish, consumed by the darkness. Hours must have passed. Minutes. Days. Time had no meaning here. I stumbled through rooms that weren't mine, hallways I hadn't known existed. Until I found myself in a space that felt familiar yet alien. The living room was the same, but the furniture had changed. The couch was shredded, the walls smeared with something dark, viscous, that reeked of iron. And on the wall opposite me, scrawled in jagged letters that seemed to move and pulse, were the words, "Don't watch alone." My hands shook violently. I reached for my phone, but it was gone. Every object I had trusted to connect me to the world, my laptop, my charger, even the flashlight app, had vanished. I was alone. Alone with it. The laughter started again, low and rhythmic, circling the room like predators stalking prey. The shadows on the walls began to solidify into shapes, tall, grotesque figures with long limbs, distorted faces, mouths too wide, teeth too sharp, eyes that gleamed like coals in the dark. They didn't speak, not yet, but I felt their hunger, smelled it in the air. I backed into a corner, curling into myself, wishing desperately for morning, for anything that might break the spell, but I knew nothing would. The night had claimed me, and it was patient. It would play with me, feed on me, until I understood exactly what it meant to watch alone. And then I heard it moving behind me, footsteps soft but deliberate. I couldn't see it, couldn't turn fast enough, but I knew it was there. Its hands brushed my hair, cold and skeletal, fingers long enough to grip the back of my skull. I cried out, but no sound escaped. I tried to fight, to push it away, but my body no longer belonged to me. I felt myself lifted, carried across the room effortlessly, the cold laughter echoing in my ears. It placed me in front of the mirror, and I realized the full horror. My reflection was no longer mimicking me. It was leading. It smiled wider, gesturing for me to watch, and I knew I had no choice. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. I couldn't tell. I was forced to watch myself, or rather, the version of myself that existed only in the mirror. It moved through a world I didn't recognize, spaces filled with shadows like mine, all watching, all waiting. There were figures, countless figures, and I understood at last that this was the pattern. The ones who watched alone were trapped, their reflections recruited into the legion, feeding the endless cycle. I tried to look away, tried to close my eyes, but the reflection wouldn't let me. It laughed, a sound that wasn't mine but resonated inside my chest like breaking glass. I saw people in the reflections, friends, strangers, lovers, all trapped in the same cycle. They screamed silently, tears streaming down faces that looked so much like mine. I understood then. Every glance, every moment of curiosity, every, just one more story, had consequences. Watching alone was an invitation, and I had answered it. I wasn't just a victim, I was a participant, a witness feeding the darkness. I woke up, or thought I did, on the floor of my apartment. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warm and golden, but wrong. There was a faint humming in the air, a vibration I could feel under my skin. I reached for my phone. It was there. Messages, calls, everything normal. Too normal. But when I looked in the mirror, I froze. My reflection was smiling, and I wasn't. And in the corner, behind the faint glare of sunlight, a shadow stretched across the wall. Not like the one before, not subtle, but huge, impossibly tall, and moving with intent. The first days after were a blur. I avoided mirrors, screens, even water surfaces where my reflection might appear. I left lights on, lamps, overheads, anything to keep the shadows at bay. But they waited. Always waiting. I could feel them crawling along the edges of my vision, lurking, lingering, whispering in the spaces between breaths. Every sound became suspect. Every flicker of light a signal. And then came the dreams. In the dreams, I was back in the apartment, but it wasn't mine. Hallways twisted impossibly, doors opened into rooms that didn't exist. Shadows stalked me, but more than shadows, faces, dozens of them, staring from the walls, from ceilings, from the floor. They whispered promises of power, of immortality, of seeing the unseen. And I knew I could never refuse. The longer I slept, the deeper I sank, until I understood the truth. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a transformation. Watching alone at night didn't just invite fear, it demanded surrender. And I was surrendering, piece by piece, reflection by reflection, until there was nothing left of me but a pale figure smiling behind the glass. I tried to warn people online, on forums, in comments, but nothing I typed stayed. Messages vanished, accounts disappeared, posts erased like they never existed. It didn't want witnesses. It didn't need them. Only the watchers. Only the alone. And now, as I write this, I realize it has begun. The edges of my vision blur. Shadows gather in the corners of the room. My reflection smiles wider. And I know that if you are reading this, if you are alone tonight, it is already here. Watching. Waiting. By the time I understood what was happening, it was already too late to stop it. The nights had started blending together, each one heavier than the last, each one stripping something human out of me. Sleep was no longer rest, it was a door I was forced through. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt myself slipping sideways into a place that wasn't quite a dream and wasn't quite reality. The shadows no longer waited for darkness. They followed me during the day, clinging to corners, stretching where no light should allow them. I caught people staring at me on the street, their expressions uneasy, their eyes lingering a moment too long, as if they sensed something wrong beneath my skin. And maybe they did. Maybe the thing inside me was already learning how to look through my eyes. The whispers grew clearer. They weren't random anymore. They spoke in patterns, repeating phrases, instructions. They told me when to look, when to listen, when to be still. I resisted at first, biting my tongue until I tasted blood, clenching my fists until my nails tore into my palms. But resistance only made it worse. The more I fought, the louder it became, the heavier my body felt, until obeying felt like relief. I hated myself for it, hated how easily I began to give in, how natural it felt to let the shadows guide me. That was when I realized the truth. It wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to replace me. Mirrors became unbearable, not because of fear alone, but because of recognition. My reflection no longer felt like an enemy. It felt familiar, comforting, like someone who understood me better than anyone ever had. It watched me with patience, with something like affection. Sometimes it moved when I didn't, tilting its head, studying me, as if memorizing what it meant to be human. Other times it stayed perfectly still, staring straight through me, as if already imagining life without me. I started talking to it without meaning to, whispering thoughts I'd never shared with anyone. It listened. It always listened. And that terrified me more than anything else. The first time I lost time, I woke up standing in the middle of my living room, the lights off, the curtains drawn tight, my phone in my hand. The screen glowed faintly, displaying a paused video I didn't remember starting. The title burned into my mind, "Don't Watch Alone at This Night." My heart nearly stopped. My finger hovered over the play button, trembling. I knew I shouldn't press it. I knew exactly what it was. But my body moved anyway. The video played, and I watched myself watching it, reflected faintly in the dark screen, my eyes wide, my face empty. That was when I understood the cycle. It wasn't just haunting people. It was using us, turning us into doorways. The watchers became the warning, and the warning became the invitation. Every share, every click, every moment of curiosity fed it. The shadow didn't need to chase anymore. It let the night do the work. I slammed the phone down, breathing hard, my chest aching like it might cave in, but even then I could feel satisfaction radiating from somewhere deep inside me. It approved. I had done what it wanted. After that, the line between my thoughts and its voice disappeared. I would think of turning off the lights, and they would flicker out on their own. I would imagine silence, and the world would hold its breath. I stopped seeing the entity as something external. It lived in me now, curled around my spine, threaded through my nerves. Sometimes, when I caught my reflection smiling, I smiled back without realizing it. Sometimes, when it spoke, my mouth moved too. The final night came without warning. No build-up, no dramatic signs, just a sudden, absolute certainty that this was the end of something. The air felt heavier than ever, pressing down on my shoulders, my lungs. I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by darkness, every light turned off, every window reflecting nothing but black. I didn't remember choosing to do that. I just knew it was right. The shadows gathered eagerly, filling the room, thick and alive, stretching toward me like they had been waiting for this moment. The mirror across from me shimmered, rippling like disturbed water, and my reflection stepped forward. It wasn't trapped behind the glass anymore. It stood in the room with me, tall and pale, its features identical yet wrong, eyes too dark, smile too calm. It looked at me with something that might have been gratitude. I felt no urge to run. No fear, only exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones when you've fought a losing battle for too long. It reached out, placing a hand over my chest, right where my heart hammered weakly. The touch was cold, but not painful. Comforting, almost. And then it spoke, softly, gently, like a promise, "You don't have to be alone anymore." I felt myself slipping, like sinking into deep water, my thoughts scattering, memories peeling away one by one. My childhood, my name, my face. All of it fading, dissolving into shadow. I tried to hold on to something, anything, but there was nothing left to grip. The last thing I saw was the mirror, now empty, reflecting a room with only one figure standing in it. Me, or what looked like me. Smiling, breathing, alive in a way I no longer was. Now I exist somewhere else. Not dead, not alive, watching, always watching. I see through screens, through reflections, through the eyes of anyone foolish enough to stare too long into the dark. I feel the night stretch endlessly, full of doors waiting to be opened. And when you read this, when you sit alone in the quiet hours, when your screen is the only light in the room, I am there with you. Patient, silent, smiling. So remember this, even if it's already too late. Don't watch alone at this night. Because the night is watching back. Crescent Moon Eye.